It's not real football, said an executive. He viewed it as gimmicky, smoke and mirrors, neither substantive nor long lasting. He was wrong. The complexities of the offense I created as compared to his real way were as dissimilar as a Rolex to a sundial. Few inventions are created out of nothing. What I was doing had its root in the theories of others who had modernized the passing game, most notably the brilliant Sid Gilman. Those who were clinging to the past had apparently forgotten the past. Early in its evolution, football did not even allow the forward pass. In fact, it was brought into college football simply as a device to make the game safer. Eddie Cochran's, head coach at St. Louis University, immediately and enthusiastically embraced the new alternative to always running the ball. In 1906, his team went 11-0 and outscored opponents 407-11. He faced, I'm sure, traditionalists who looked down their noses at what he had incorporated as part of his search for victory. It's often the case that a game changer takes a while to change the way the game is played. And that is a quote from Bill Walsh. The Score Takes Care of Itself, which is the man and the book we'll be examining today. This is an interesting book because it's not only a book on Bill Walsh, but it's also a book on leadership. And so it's not really very linear. It can be challenging to put together as far as historical context goes, when happens, at what point. The book begins with Walsh at the 49ers. He's coming from a successful 2-year stint of being the head coach at Stanford University, and he comes into an absolute disaster at the 49ers. He calls this, and many others at the time call it, the backwater of the NFL. And here's a story of what happened the prior 2 years before he was hired. Joe Thomas, the general manager, had basically gutted the entire 49ers organization, forcing out head coach Monty Clark, whose 8-6 record had been the 49ers' first winning season in 4 years. Hiring and firing 3 head coaches in 12 months, impetuously and vindictively firing humiliating players in front of the team, trading away or releasing quality talent, including quarterback Jim Plunkett to the Oakland Raiders, whom he would soon take to 2 Super Bowl championships, and removing all success memorabilia from previous years. Perhaps the highlight of Thomas's mismanagement was his acquisition of O.J. Simpson from the Buffalo Bills when the superstar was at the end of his career, overweight, arthritic, and out of gas. Thomas had concluded that Simpson would attract fans simply because he was a local kid from San Francisco's Potrero Hill neighborhood. Fans thought otherwise and decided that seeing Simpson sitting bored on the bench with a bag of ice on his knee was not worth the price of admission. The cost to the organization was extreme. First round, second round, third round, and fourth round draft picks over 3 years appeared to have mortgaged away the future of the franchise. What remained was a demoralized, chaotic, and near mutinous organizational culture of failure that was epitomized by a team that produced a 2-14 record the year prior to my arrival. One writer declared that the San Francisco 49ers were the worst franchise in all of professional sports. Not just football, all professional sports. And this is wild for professional sports. This next quote says, the organization's substandard headquarters and training facility didn't have enough space for a regulation-sized football field, so the team used 2 semi-fields in Redwood City, California. The weight room was sparsely furnished with resting weights, the showers ran cold if somebody flushed the toilet, and our offices were worn, sparse, and cramped. So what does Bill think and do? He says, I approached building the 49er organization with an agenda that didn't include a timetable for a championship or even a winning season. Instead, I arrived with an urgent timetable for installing an agenda of specific behavioral norms, actions, and attitudes that applied to every single person on our payroll. I would teach each person in the organization what to do and how to think. The short-term results would contribute both symbolically and functionally to a new and productive self-image and environment and become the foundation upon which we could launch our longer-term goal, namely, the resurrection of a football franchise. For me to do this, I had to have autonomy, the power to quickly make decisions in all relevant areas. This isn't new for anybody who's been listening to this podcast. We see this in Phil Jackson and Johan Cruyff too. When they go in to build what they envision, they take complete control of the organization. Now, I will say that Bill Walsh's is a little bit different because he is the head coach and the general manager, meaning that he staffs the entire 49ers organization. So the reason why he's able to do this is because there's a buyout of the 49ers. The DiBartolo family buys them out, and Eddie DiBartolo Jr., who's only 30 at the time, inherits the 49ers. He doesn't have that much football education, but his father gives him the 49ers organization, and he decides to fire the coach. He hires Bill Walsh, and not only does he do that, but he installs him as the general manager as well. I think maybe because he sees such obsession, such passion within Bill, that he knows he's going to do a good job, but he has to do it his way. He offers the general manager job to Bill Walsh, and Bill at first doesn't want to take it, but after Eddie and his assistant persuade him, saying, hey, basically, you can have control of this whole thing, you get to hire, you get to fire whoever you want, he then can see his vision come to life. And again, this isn't unlike Phil Jackson, who's already at the Bulls, who already sees the pieces to the puzzle that he needs and installs them and empowers them in certain ways. And Johan Cruyff as well at Ajax and Barcelona has a lot of control over who they sign, who they don't sign. He does get in fights when he doesn't have that control anymore. And I think we'll see Bill Walsh not necessarily get into the same kind of fights that Johan Cruyff does, but he will buck at the system a bit. And this eventually completely burns him out later on. But at this time, he sees something that he can make in his image, and he's excited. Bill's big claim to fame throughout this book is his standard of performance. And he defines it as a way of doing things, a leadership philosophy that has as much to do with core values, principles, and ideals as with blocking, tackling, and passing, more to do with the mental than with the physical. He says, while I prized preparation, planning, precision, and poise, I also knew that organizational ethics were crucial to ultimate and ongoing success. It began with this fundamental leadership assertion: regardless of your specific job, it is vital to our team that you do that job at the highest possible level in all its various aspects, both mental and physical. For example, good talent with bad attitude equals bad talent. He says, my mission statement was implanted in the minds of our people through teaching. My standard of performance, the values and beliefs within it, guided everything I did in my work in San Francisco and are defined as follows. Exhibit a ferocious and intelligently applied work ethic directed at continual improvement. Demonstrate respect for each person in the organization and the work he or she does. Be deeply committed to learning and teaching, which means increasing my own expertise. Be fair. Demonstrate character. Honor the direct connection between details and improvement, and relentlessly seek the latter. Show self-control, especially where it counts most, under pressure. Demonstrate and prize loyalty. Use positive language and have a positive attitude. Take pride in my effort as an entity separate from the results of that effort. Be willing to go the extra distance for the organization. Deal appropriately with victory and defeat, adulation and humiliation. Don't get crazy with victory, nor dysfunctional with loss. Promote internal communication that is both open and substantive, especially under stress. Seek poise in myself and those I lead. Put the team's welfare and priorities ahead of my own. Maintain an ongoing level of concentration and focus that is abnormally high. That's my personal favorite. I love that one. And finally, make sacrifice and commitment the organization's trademark. How do you do this as a leader? You must first identify and hire the best people you can find, then teach them what is necessary to achieve the required levels of performance. Bill says, I began hiring personnel with 4 characteristics I value most highly: talent, character, functional intelligence, beyond basic intelligence, the ability to think on your feet quickly and spontaneously, and an eagerness to adopt my way of doing things, my philosophy. I sought intelligence in employees, not just for the obvious reason, but also because a dull-witted staff member who's aggressive creates anarchy. I sought individuals who had the ability to work with others. A fundamental element in this is not only the ability of a person to understand his own role and how it fits into the organization's goal, but a knowledge or understanding of other people's roles. Individuals who didn't measure up in various ways were removed without fanfare, usually, and those who challenged my authority did so at risk. In the beginning, our players, coaches, and staff heard little talk from me about winning anything, and certainly not by some arbitrary date. The record didn't mean as much as the season progressed, because we were immersed in building the inventory of skills, both attitudinal and physical, that would lead to improved execution. That was the key. I directed our focus less to the prize of victory than to the process of improving, obsessing perhaps about the quality of our execution and the content of our thinking, that is, our actions and attitudes. We get into Bill's practice style. He says, on paper, my diagrams of plays resembled detailed architectural drawings, and they required the same exactness in construction, execution, that a good contractor brings to building a skyscraper. And this reminds me of Phil Jackson's talk when he speaks to the Bulls whenever Horace Grant and Scottie Pippen are going through some sort of tiff. Michael Jordan hosts a Super Bowl party inside of his hotel room. Phil tells them, hey, you guys are doing this for much more than money. You're doing this for each other. And Bill has the same sentiment here, Bill Walsh does. You may ask how the team did over the season with these massive changes. Well, Bill says, it all sounds pretty simple, doesn't it? But it's a tough road. At the end of my first year, giving it everything I had, working more hours than seemed possible, and after installing many of the elements of my standard of performance, this is what we had to show for it. The same miserable one-lost record as the year before, 2-14. To get perspective on this, Randy Cross, his former assistant coach who saw what it was like before Bill arrived in San Francisco and after, said the year before Bill arrived, we were 2-14 and maybe the worst team in the history of the NFL. The next year under Bill, we had exactly the same record, 2-14, but we were the best 2-14 team in the history of the NFL. I love that. Bill adds, the exceptional assembly line comes first, before the quality car. My standard of performance was establishing a better and better assembly line. We were becoming a first-class organization in all areas. Achieving success takes patience, time, and fortitude. When you build an organization, it's usually successful decades down the line. And people think that maybe in the first 2 or 3 years, or even 5 or 6 years, that the organizations all of a sudden are successful, these bigger names, but that's not it at all. It actually takes years and years, and as I said before, sometimes decades for that company to take off and become the success that we know it as today. And that's compound interest. That's putting in the time, the effort, the learning, the capability of the leadership staff. Like Bill Walsh says, his standard of performance needed some time to gestate throughout the entire organization before it actually resulted in wins on the field. Bill says if things are going well, points being scored in games won, your organization may be elated and lose focus. If things are going poorly, as they were when I arrived at San Francisco, people are likely to be despondent and start looking for the exit. Incredibly, both can exist at the same time. Even when you have an organization brimming with talent, victory is not always under your control. Rather, it's like quicksilver, fleeting and elusive, not something you can summon at will, even under the best circumstances. Almost always, your road to victory goes through a place called failure. However, a resolute and resourceful leader understands that there are a multitude of means to increase the probability of success. And that's what it comes down to, namely, intelligently and relentlessly seeking solutions that will increase your chance of prevailing in a competitive environment. In many ways, it comes down to details. The intense focus on those pertinent details cements the foundation that establishes excellence in performance. The simplest correct execution of procedures represents the commitment of players and staff to the organization and the organization to them. Specifics such as shirt tails in, understanding and respecting the jobs of others in the organization, running exactly 10 yards and not 10 yards 15 inches, exhibiting a positive attitude. answering the phones professionally, seeing the team as an extension of yourself, all contribute in varying degrees to a devotion to high standards visible to everyone. The self-image of the 49ers as a first-class professional outfit was nurtured and carefully developed in these incremental ways. That's what I focused on, knowing that if I did so, winning would take care of itself. This is very related to what Cruyff said. Cruyff said, minimize the small mistakes. Problems seldom come from the big ones. So the big problems, such as losing games or tactical dysfunctions, are almost always downstream of small lapses. There are several stories here from outside sources throughout the book, and they give clear examples of how Bill was when he coached the 49ers. This story comes from John McVay, former vice president of the 49ers. I came to work my first day not wearing a tie. Bill liked to distinguish between coaches, no ties, and administration, ties. I was in administration, but I told him, Bill, all of my ties have New York Giants helmets on them. He smiled and said, John, I guess you're buying a new tie today. The small detail of wearing a tie was connected to his big concept of being a first-class operation, not just in point production, but in appearance and behavior, which he believed preceded scoring touchdowns, and he spelled it out word by word. I bought a new tie. He also says, Bill Walsh was the king, and we knew it. He was the one in complete control, and he knew it. But the interesting thing about it was that he didn't act like a king. No bowing and scraping required. Bill wanted to be called Bill. Everyone was on a first-name basis. But within that informality, he simply did not allow for casual execution of your job. There was intensity and urgency, a focus all the time, a tight ship. He was friendly, but he held himself in a certain manner so that you knew he was in charge. Bill Walsh was not afraid of talent. He hired assistant coaches who were extremely good, and he did it with the expectation that they would move on, up to head coaching positions. And in fact, about 15 of them did. He didn't feel that you sold your soul to the company's store. While you were a 49er, you were expected to give it your all. But Bill was very enlightened in the way he supported the lives and careers of employees beyond just what they could do for his team. And another great story from John is when the 49ers held open tryouts his first year on the job. He says, one day it was 90 degrees and we had over 100 prospects on the field going through the workout, trying to make the team. And I was standing up on the fire escape platform with Bill looking over this herd of guys. He said to me, John, who's that blonde kid down there? At first I couldn't even tell who he was talking about. He pointed again. Him, that kid over there with blonde hair. I checked my chart. Bill Ring, I replied. Sign him, Bill said. That was the end of the discussion. Bill Ring gave us 6 productive years and helped us win Super Bowl 16 and Super Bowl 19, even though others thought he wasn't NFL material. Bill picked him out of a large pack of players with hardly a glance. He was simply unbelievable in the way he could spot potential in a person and then develop it. Something I love about this story, all of these stories that we just heard from John McVay, is you can really hear Bill Walsh's voice come out from his book. But what I really like is that these stories back up that voice. And if Bill Walsh sounds like he's not as intense through his voice in his book, it sounds like these people that give these stories, and again, there's about 5 or 6 of them, actually confirm his intensity and confirm the kind and caring person that he is, and confirm also that not only is he a scout for talent, but he's actually a tactical genius as well. And that's something we're going to see right here. One of the biggest tactical shifts in the history of the NFL occurred while Bill was coaching the 49ers. And of course, it was Bill's innovation. However, this offensive power play didn't start with the 49ers. Bill says, the West Coast offense was nothing more than my attempt to make the most out of what I had to work with as quarterback coach for the Cincinnati Bengals. And what I had wasn't much. A recent expansion franchise with perhaps the least overall talent of any team in the AFL. Among other things, the Bengals absolutely could not move the ball on the ground because other teams were just too strong for us. That left the pass our only option. Unfortunately, our quarterback, Virgil Carter, wasn't much of a passer in the traditional sense of having a strong arm capable of throwing deep with accuracy. In studying film of Virgil and watching him in practice, I determined that while he didn't have much of an arm, he was composed under pressure and could read defenses and was nimble physically and quick mentally. Carter was very intelligent, a Scholastic All-American while at Brigham Young University. Additionally, he was able to throw short passes pretty well. What I came up with called for Carter to throw lots of short, quick-release, time passes to any one of multiple receivers running exact routes, usually within 12 yards of the line of scrimmage. In designing appropriate plays, I was constantly choosing and mixing from a choice of running backs, wide receivers, and tight ends. While each individual receiver's running route was not complicated, collectively it was complex and made almost dizzying to the defense by the fact that over the years I eventually began hiding the same play cosmetically by altering our formation at the line of scrimmage. Thus, the receivers for the Bengals could line up in different spots before the snap, but run a route to the same location and be ready for the quarterback's pass, whether it came from Virgil Carter or Joe Montana. When you do this for scores of plays, and nobody in the NFL was doing it, you have an almost exponential multiplier of factors and foolers the defense has to figure out instantaneously. Often, they would think they were seeing something brand new while the quarterback was, in a sense, seeing something old. His receivers in the same places seconds after the ball snap, even though the basic formation and routes run were quite different. To make it all work, I stretched the field horizontally to create more room, used all available space from sideline to sideline to avoid bunching our receivers and their defenders just beyond the line of scrimmage. I created an array of pass options that the defense had to figure out, usually in less than 3.5 seconds. Often it was over, the lightning quick short pass completed, before they knew what hit them. Because the passes were often just beyond the line of scrimmage, slower linebackers and safeties were forced into coverage against quicker running backs, whom I converted into potential receivers. This was a key to maximizing yardage on our pass play, because I counted on the backs and tight ends to run the yardage after they caught the ball. In the middle of this seeming bedlam, the quarterback's job was to immediately scan the field, locate an open receiver among up to 5 possibilities amid an attacking pack of rushers, and throw a precise pass. Not an easy task. Of course, that's where we capitalized on Carter's limited skills. Great composure, nimble feet, good ability to read defenses, ability to throw short passes with accuracy. The skills necessary to run my offense were not lesser skills than those of the traditional strong-armed quarterback. They were different skills, equally valuable, perhaps more so, and uncommon. No strong arm? No problem. Perhaps the greatest quarterback of all time, Joe Montana, carried a resume that lacked mention of a powerful throwing arm. My many short pass plays and their cosmetic variations would open up running and downfield passing opportunities, which we exploited. Ideally, we would present an ongoing assortment of plays that kept the defense off balance and vulnerable. That's how NFL offensive football was changed from checkers to chess. This is incredibly related to the triangle offense of Phil Jackson's Bulls and Johan Cruyff's total football with Ajax and Barcelona. If you remember, Phil Jackson travels around the NBA as an assistant with the Bulls. To his amazement, he realizes everyone is using the same mode of operation, power basketball. It was the main philosophy basketball tactic in the 80s, which reinforced a self-centered approach to the game. This ushers in Tex Winter's triangle offense when Phil eventually becomes the coach. The Bulls didn't have power players. An emphasis on intelligence, speed, quickness, and finesse would have to happen. According to Laureano Ruiz, former Barcelona youth team coach, when Cruyff arrives at Barcelona, there's a sign on the door of the coach's room which said, "If you're offering us a youth player who's less than 1.8 meters tall, turn around and go home." All 3 coaches were in an environment where power won, and they adapted. So instead of using that power basketball or big, tall, strong players in soccer or quarterbacks with very strong arms, they had to adapt their play so that players of any size could play. Players of different speeds could play. Players that emphasized quickness could play. Players that really had intelligence could play. Now back to Bill Walsh. And here's an interesting but very irritating footnote. This is Bill speaking. For my effort in coming up with a successful new way of doing things, I received the disparagement of many in the NFL, especially old-timers who dismissively called it the nickel and dime, dink and dunk, fancy pants, or finesse offense, even the swish and sway. Their condescension stemmed from the fact that my approach didn't rely on the traditional brute force, grinding ground game, or spectacular long bomb pass of old-time NFL football. It wasn't physical enough for them. Sound familiar? All three coaches were coming up against a prevailing thought that height, brute force, and strength wins the competition. So how do they respond? Phil Jackson built the triangle offense not around Jordan's talent, but around spacing, flow, reads, and team geometry. When Jordan left, the offense still functioned because the system produced advantage. The Bulls still made it to the conference semifinals and took the New York Knicks to Game 7. Cruyff, total football, made use of players who weren't physically dominant. His entire philosophy, football is a game you play with your brain. This is the core link. All three systems turn ordinary players into extraordinary ones by placing them inside a structure that maximizes their strengths. How did they use the field to their advantage? Walsh, I stretched the field horizontally, used all available space from sideline to sideline. Cruyff, when you've got the distances and formation right, everything falls into place. The aim is always to create as much space as possible. Jackson, triangle offense is built on spacing, filling the corners, stretching the defense, and opening passing options. All three coaches use space as their primary weapon, not speed or power. They all build a dynamic, option-rich decision tree, short distances, multiple links, quick recognition, predictive structure. There's deception through this structure, not chaos. Walsh says, I hid the same play cosmetically by altering the formation. Defense sees something new. Quarterback sees something old. This is positional superiority in football and false options in basketball. Cruyff, it appears chaotic, it's actually highly orchestrated. Movements create illusions of opportunities. Distances, angles, and rolls stay the same underneath. Phil Jackson, same entry actions, different reads depending on the defense. Structure produces emergent unpredictability. This is a unified coaching idea. To the defense, it looks chaotic. To us, it is simple. All three coaches turned limitations into superpowers. Walsh took a QB with no arm and turned him into the prototype of an entire NFL revolution. Phil Jackson took a selfish, ball-dominant Michael Jordan, a withdrawn Scottie Pippen, a timid Horace Grant, and built a system where their perceived flaws became their unity and advantage. Cruyff took slower defenders, smaller players, youth talents lacking physique, and built positional systems where intelligence outweighed strength. Great coaches don't need perfect players. They need players that fit into their system, or they need to build the system around their players. This is my favorite relation between all three of the coaches, which is reading the game quickly, which means they're scanning awareness. Bill Walsh says the quarterback's job, immediately scan the field, locate an open receiver among 5 possibilities. Cruyff, scanning every 3 to 5 seconds. You must always have an overview of the pitch. Football is about what you can see. Phil Jackson, mindfulness training, present moment awareness, reading subtle cues in teammates and opponents. All three emphasize rapid perception, rapid decision, rapid execution. The systems rely on cognitive speed, not physical speed. They also rely on repetition of the system. Michael Jordan says that after 8 years of practicing the triangle offense, he still made mistakes. He says it took 3 years before they could fully implement the system. Phil Jackson says it took the team 18 months to get comfortable with the system, 2.5 years to master it. The same here could be said for Bill Walsh. He says, we did the same drills over and over again. I said essentially the same thing over and over, discussed the same information, concepts, and principles over and over. Gradually, my teaching stuck. Eventually, successful execution became almost automatic, even under extreme duress, because like air, my teaching was everywhere. His team got it their 3rd year. Here's a hidden common foundation too, which is really neat. Geometry. At the deepest level, Walsh used horizontal width plus timed routes. Phil used triangles and spacing geometry. Cruyff used triangles and positional grids. Their systems work because they maximize available space, they create predictable passing points, they generate numerical, positional, or qualitative superiority, and they simplify reads for the attacking player. They also increase the defense's cognitive load. It's fortuitous we're doing these 3 coaches first. They're all systems coaches, and many coaches that we profile on Tacticians Podcast will be systems coaches. Some of them aren't though, and those will be fun to do as well. Bill said he had no intention to create an offensive revolution, but to innovate with the players he had. He says, while all of this was initially being developed, there was never a thought in my mind that it would alter football in any radical way. I was looking at a situation that had little going for it and trying to get something going. I was forced to be innovative to a degree I didn't foresee. The effectiveness of my new offensive scheme was startling. The 49ers are running a lot of pass plays that have the receiver catch the ball for 12 yards when they need 15 for a first down. This was counterintuitive at the time and even gets criticized by Howard Cosell on Monday Night Football. Bill comments, what Howard and many others missed in the early days was that 60% of the yardage on our pass plays came through running after the catch. A 12-yard pass was designed to produce an additional 7-yard gain on the ground. Bill has 4 main lessons he attaches to the creation of his offense. 1. Success doesn't care which road you take to get to its doorstep. Traditionalists, rigid and resistant in their thinking, who sneered at the new passing system I was creating, were soon trying to figure out why it was beating them and how to copy it. 2. Be bold. Remove fear of the unknown, that is, change, from your mind. Respect the past without clinging to it. 3. Desperation should not drive innovation. Here's a good question to write on a Post-it note and put on your desk. What assets do we have right now that we're not taking advantage of? While waiting to get what you want, make the most of what you've got. 4, and this is my personal favorite, be obsessive in looking for the upside and the downside. Instead of looking for reasons we couldn't make it work, I sought solutions that would make it succeed. Here's another huge innovation Bill Walsh brought to football. He leads with this. Having a well thought out plan ready to go in advance of a change in the weather is the key to success. Making decisions off the top of my head was a recipe for a bad decision, especially under pressure. I predetermined, wrote down our first 4 plays. In Cincinnati, Bill has an experience of being unprepared for a moment in an AFC playoff game against Oakland. He completely forgets the plays they practice that would best work under a hostile and rowdy crowd. And they definitely have a hostile and rowdy crowd inside of the Oakland Coliseum. He vows never to let that happen again. He says the number of plays I planned out increased substantially the following year when I was with the San Diego Chargers as Tommy Prothro's offensive coordinator. The next year when I was head coach at Stanford University, the number increased again, and the impact was startling. Stanford scored on our first possession 8 times in 11 games. Typically, during a season, a team might score once or twice on the initial drive of a game. Bill takes us with him to San Francisco a year later. He says our first 20 or 25 plays of the game would be scripted, along with a multitude of options, alternatives, and contingency plans depending on the situation and circumstance. I was visualizing the game ahead, seeing what would happen. I could close my eyes and literally see all 22 men running and responding to some specific play I had drawn up. I was the first to employ scripting to this extent, and it gave us a stunning tactical offensive asset that no other teams were utilizing at that time. Scripting was a most effective leadership tool in fair and foul weather. In a very calculated way, I began calling the plays for the game before the game was played. It took years for other teams to fully implement the concepts I'd been developing for a long time. Bill is not visualizing the first set of plays, then moving on to another and another. He actually creates contingency plans and what-if situations and visualizes those too. He says most leaders take this no deeper than the first level of inquiry. You must envision the future deeply and in detail, creatively, so that the unforeseeable becomes foreseeable. Then you write your script for the foreseeable. And why does Bill do this? Why does he need to plan like this? Here's his answer. I don't care how smart or quick-witted you are, what your training or your intellect is. Under extreme stress, you're not as good. Here's maybe the most important part of this. He didn't just expect this from himself. He expected his coaches to script their plays too, and for his players to deeply understand them. With the 49ers, I began asking my offensive coaches to give their 25 scripted plays. Then I'd revise and add my own to their ideas. We'd go over the new list with the team. They wanted those plays and would raid my offense to get them. Randy Cross, a big offensive lineman and one of only a few to play on San Francisco's first 3 Super Bowl teams, would come in and say, I want those plays, Bill. Where are they? During a practice, I'd tell them, this is the first play of the game on Sunday. Right away, the expectation level would pop up. Now they connected practice with the game. The scripted plays extended that. This wasn't actually as robotic as it may sound. Bill states, from start to finish, our entire team, especially the assistant coaches, were intensely analyzing every single thing that happened on the field and looking for the right response, whether it was scripted or not. There was tremendous flexibility, creativity, and adaptability applied to what I had on the clipboard in front of me, just as there should be for you and your organization. With all the creativity, visualization, organization, and innovation happening at San Francisco, they must have seen drastic improvement in the second year of Bill's tenure, right? Well, not exactly. They do go 6-10, which is better than their 2-14 record the previous year. They have an 8-game losing streak in the middle of the season, which is the biggest disappointment of their season, especially to the fans. Bill even decides he'll hand in his resignation after a loss to Miami, in which he cries for most of the flight home and is in emotional turmoil. Bill says, when the inevitable setback, loss, failure, or defeat comes crashing down on you, allow yourself the grieving time, but then recognize that the road to recovery and victory lies in having the strength to get up off the mat and start planning your next move. This is how you must think if you want to win. Otherwise, you have lost. When you're fighting for your survival professionally, struggling when virtually no one else knows or cares, and there's nobody to bail you out, that's when you might remind yourself of my own dark night of despair. When you stand and overcome a significant setback, you'll find an increasing inner confidence and self-assurance that has been created by conquering defeat. Absorbing and overcoming this kind of punishment engenders a sober, steely toughness that results in a hardened sense of independence and a personal belief that you can take on anything, survive, and win. Regarding Bill's painful flight home, Bill says, in my mind or gut, and in spite of the pain, I knew I had to force myself to somehow start looking ahead, or it would severely damage our efforts to prepare properly. My comportment would directly affect the attitudes and performance of everyone who looked to me for answers and direction. I had to do what I was being paid to do, be a leader. We see this in Cruyff too. Both coaches look back to learn the lesson, and it comes fast to them. They immediately move their mind to the future, how they can be better, how they can be successful, and solve the next problem. After analyzing that season, Bill decides that they weren't as bad as the record shows, and he does this through a series of statistics in the books. Some of these statistics, they had key injuries to players throughout the year that held them back, and they were about to draft Ronnie Lott and bring in veteran Jack Hacksaw Reynolds, which would propel their defense to heights unseen in San Francisco. And just a sidebar here, there's a crazy story of Ronnie Lott getting his pinky crushed during a preseason game. He's supposed to be out for several weeks, and he asks his doctor if there's anything he can do to speed up the recovery of his injury. His doctor jokes that he can remove the pinky and put his arm in a cast where he can play. To the doctor's incredulity, Ronnie tells the doctor to take off the pinky. He takes off part of it and plays in a cast to start the season. Talk about commitment, and I'm not sure if that's good commitment in the long run or not, but that's just the type of person that San Francisco is about to draft. On potentially quitting the job at San Francisco when he has that contemplation after his second season, Bill says, all of this could have been overlooked or misinterpreted had I been distracted by the enormity of the 8-game losing streak and 6-10 record. Had I not been a good organizational archaeologist. Every leader does year-end reviews and comes to conclusions of one sort or another. My observation is that two leaders, coaches, looking at the same information will not see the same thing. The one who's a more skilled analyst who digs deeper and wider will benefit more. It is an endeavor to which I allocated as much energy as my preparation for every game and opponent. In planning for a successful future, the past can show you how to get there. Too often we avert our gaze when the past is unpleasant. We don't want to go there again, even though it contains the roadmap to a bright future. How good are you at looking through the evidence from the past, especially the recent past? There's a certain knack to it, but basically it requires a keen eye for analysis, a common sense mind for parsing evidence that offers clues to why things went as they did, both good and bad. And of course, it often requires a strong stomach, because what you're rummaging through may include not only achievements, but the remains of a very painful professional fiasco. So let's rewind the clock a little bit, and I want to talk about the oddities of mentorship. One of Bill's first scouting buddies and eventual assistant at the 49ers has this story to tell. When Bill is just getting his start, he becomes a scout for University of California, Berkeley. The coach was Marv Levy at the time, and to impress Marv, Bill walks in and hands him his master's thesis on defensive football. Marv doesn't look at it, but tosses it on a shelf and tells Bill to go scout with Mike. Mike says, "Gradually I saw his football mind appear, because he was always drawing on napkins, plays, diagrams, routes. It just came out of him naturally, spontaneously, even during meetings. When Marv was standing at the chalkboard diagramming some X's and O's, Bill would get up and say, 'Have you thought about doing it this way?' And he'd start drawing out some complicated play he'd thought up. This really rankled Levy, in part because Bill was supposed to be working the defensive side of things. As fast as Bill could write something with his left hand, Marv would follow next to him, erasing it with his right hand." I love that. Marv Levy was not the only guy, just the first guy along the way who failed to see the brilliance in what Bill was coming up with. Throughout his career, Bill Walsh was constantly underestimated. Al Davis at Oakland was even a bigger influence on Bill when Bill was an assistant with the Raiders. He says, "At Oakland, Al Davis introduced me to, and anyone else on his staff who cared to pay attention, an approach to preparation and execution unlike anything I'd ever seen. He was obsessed with achieving superior organizational performance and professionalism. His devotion to quality became Oakland's official team motto, commitment to excellence. And it wasn't just a marketing slogan. Al Davis was deeply dedicated to achieving it. He didn't just mouth the motto, he personified it. Oh, this is how you do it," probably summed up my early reaction to seeing him run things. Al had a tremendous football background, including being a player, a personnel assistant, an assistant coach, a head coach, and much more. I saw it manifested in his decisiveness, boldness, and advanced thinking. While he never put his arm around my shoulder and offered tutoring and career counseling as a mentor might, it didn't matter. I was paying attention. In his first 2 Super Bowl appearances, Bill Walsh goes up against his former team, the Cincinnati Bengals. Bill says, "In San Francisco's first Super Bowl appearance, we played Cincinnati. Their quarterback, Ken Anderson, threw for 300 yards with 25 completions, 2 touchdowns, and a 73.5% completion rate. Both the number of completions and percentage rate set Super Bowl records. Anderson outpassed Joe Montana's 157 total passing yards, 14 completions, and 1 touchdown. But Montana's nearly error-free performance earned him the title of Super Bowl MVP. Cincinnati got nickel and dimed, outscored 26-21 by an offensive scheme created in part while Anderson was my quarterback." This is where Paul Brown, legendary coach of the Bengals, worked. And Paul was a huge mentor, like the biggest mentor, I would say, at least in reading this book, for Bill. The impact he had as a mentor for Bill is just outstanding. Bill says of Paul, "Brown would start each season with the phrase, 'Gentlemen, let's set the record straight.' And then he'd proceed to do exactly that. Step by step by step, specific after specific, he would cover every aspect of being on the Cincinnati Bengals football team. He discussed how to wear the uniform, how to dress for meals, how each player was expected to keep his locker in order. He told players how he wanted them to respond to coaching, how to take notes during lectures, how teaching would be done, and what to expect from each assistant coach. Brown covered such specifics as punctuality, the training room rules, what would happen when players were waived, and the overall environment he intended to create. He shared his policy of treating each player equally, with the same high level of respect and dignity. Each year his lecture, and it was only a sampling of topics, lasted about 4 hours, and voluminous printed material supplemented the lecture. Paul Brown was thorough enough that when the Bengals personnel left the meeting room, they knew precisely what they were supposed to do in the coming weeks, and that their head coach expected them to enthusiastically adhere to every procedure, policy, and timetable he had specified. But there was a big problem in this relationship. Paul liked to covet his coaches and did not let them grow into other roles throughout the NFL. Even though Cincinnati was so successful under the years of Bill Walsh as their quarterback coach and eventual offensive coordinator, Bill was never approached about a head coaching job. Even when Bill leaves the Bengals and tries to get another coaching job within the league, he's blackballed. This had to do with Paul Brown calling owners and coaches and telling them not to hire Bill. And he did this by saying that he wasn't very good, that he was a little lackadaisical, that he didn't care as much, which really fired Bill up. When the 49ers meet the Bengals again, so they actually meet them in another Super Bowl, this time in Super Bowl 23, the 49ers won on a game-winning touchdown drive led by Joe Montana in the final minute of the game. Bill says, and watching both of those San Francisco Super Bowl victories against Cincinnati was the president of the Bengals, my former boss, Paul Brown, a man who had aggressively worked to prevent me from ever becoming a head coach in the NFL. This reminds me personally of Greek mythology, where the son defeats or kills the father, exactly like Zeus defeating Cronus and imprisoning him in the underworld. It's amazing sometimes how myths repeat themselves in people's lives, and perhaps that's why we have myths, not only for lessons learned, but we can actually see them enact themselves out in day-to-day life. Bill has the exact opposite experience with his time under San Diego Chargers head coach Tommy Prothro, another mentor for Bill, although a short mentor for Bill. When Bill receives an offer to be head coach of Stanford University, Tommy tells him, take the job, Bill, because a head coaching position in the Pac-10 is significant. For the good of your family and career and peace of mind, go to Stanford. On mentoring, Bill says, there has never been a leader who arrived fully formed, who figured it all out by himself or herself. Always there are mentors, some official, some unofficial. We apprentice when we are young, and it should continue even when we are old. A good leader is always learning. The great leaders start learning young and continue until their last breath. I really believe that that's what we're doing here on Tacticians Podcast, is even though a lot of these leaders, actually, with the exception of Phil so far, Johan and Bill Walsh are both dead, but we can still learn from their books, from their interviews, from the way they played, from their games. And this is what we're doing. We're mentoring under the best coaches in the entire world, in the entire history of sports. We're mentoring under them. Bill's father was also another mentor for him, but in a different way. Bill never really knew his father very well because he was always working. He says, when I was a teenager, I had to work with him on many of these evenings and weekends, long hours into the night helping him out. I hated it. But he taught me the connection between hard work and survival, between survival and success. Dad taught me that. His work ethic became my work ethic. I'd like to go over leadership as well, because he has, obviously this whole book is on leadership. He still has a lot here just on the organizational formation phase of an organization. Bill says, I wanted a democratic style organization with input and communication and freedom of expression, even opinions that were at great variance with my ideas. Reminds me of Abraham Lincoln here. But only up to a point. When it was time for a decision, that decision would be made by me according to dictates having to do with one thing only, namely, making the team better. And once the decision was made, the discussion was over. My ultimate job and yours is not to give an opinion. Everybody's got an opinion. Leaders are paid to make a decision. The difference between offering an opinion and making a decision is the difference between working for the leader and being the leader. Once I accumulated and evaluated the available information, I did it my way, and so should you. At Stanford, Bill had one of the best quarterbacks in the country, but he was determined to show that his unstoppable running game couldn't be stopped. At a press conference, he dared Tulane to try and stop the run game, and they did. He eventually starts passing the ball, and it unlocks Tulane's defense. They win the game 21-17, Stanford does. Bill says, I had jeopardized the game by locking my ego into a strategy that was failing. It was my ego and strength of will that had almost killed us. So the question is this: how do you know when it's time to quit, to try another approach, to move in a different direction? We tend to ignore the more numerous examples of individuals who persisted and finally failed and took everybody down with them because they would not change course or quit. We ignore them because we never heard about them. Failure rarely garners the amount of attention that victory does. I bring this up because there's a lot about premeditation and planning and organizing and scripting throughout this book. But he makes a really good point here. You have to be adaptable, and you have to rely on the people next to you to help with ideas and implementation. Bill has a list of 13 leadership habits, and I'll shorten them here, but I want to read all of them to you. Number 1, be yourself. You must be the best version of yourself that you can be. Stay within the framework of your own personality and be authentic. 2, be committed to excellence. Your focus must be on doing things at the highest possible level. 3, be positive. I spent far more time teaching what to do than what not to do. Far more time teaching and encouraging individuals than criticizing them. More time building up than tearing down. 4, be prepared. Good luck is a product of good planning. Work hard to get ready for expected situations. Plan and prepare for the unexpected. 5, be detail-oriented. High performance is achieved small step by small step through painstaking detail to pertinent details, not all details. 6, be organized. You must think clearly with a disciplined mind, especially in regard to the most efficient and productive use of time and resources. 7, be accountable. Excuse making is contagious. Answerability starts with you. 8, be nearsighted and farsighted. Keep everything in perspective while simultaneously concentrating fully on the task at hand. 9, be fair. Your value system is as important to success as your expertise. 10, be firm. I would not budge 1 inch on my core values, standards, and principles. 11, be flexible. Consistency is crucial, but you must be quick to adjust to new challenges that defy the old solutions. 12, believe in yourself. A leader must sell himself to the team. Belief derives from expertise. 13, be a leader. You must know where you're going and how you intend to get there, keeping in mind that it may be necessary to modify your tactics as circumstances dictate. You must be able to inspire and motivate through teaching people how to execute their jobs at the highest level. You must care about people and help those people care about one another and the team's goals. And you must never second guess yourself on decisions you make with integrity, intelligence, and a team-first attitude. We spoke about the game's tactics used throughout the league at this time and Bill's ingenious adjustment to it, but we didn't talk about the dominating motivational tactic in the NFL. It was one of denigrating the players, treating them like animals so they'd find something inside themselves they didn't know they had, basically putting them through hell in practice so they would rev up for the game and demonize the opponent. Bill was different here. He didn't want his team exhibiting so much emotional energy. He wanted them energized to play, but not in a brute force type of way. His counter to that was his planning nature and relating to his players as people. Recognizing this, Bill also says that a leader needs a very hard edge inside. It has to lurk in there somewhere and come out on occasion. You must be able to make and carry out harsh and, at times, ruthless decisions in a manner that is fast, firm, and fair. Applied correctly, this hard edge will not only solve the immediate difficulty, but also prevent future problems by sending out this important message. Cross my line and you can expect severe consequences. This will have ongoing benefits for your organization. From time to time, leaders must show this hard edge. They must make those around them somewhat uneasy, even ill at ease, in not knowing what to expect from you, the leader. The knowledge that there is this hardness inside you can have a very sobering effect on those who might otherwise be sloppy, those who occasionally need to be reminded of your policies and practices. Members of your organization should be empowered by the expertise and motivation you offered, the standard of performance you have defined, but also their very clear understanding of the consequences of taking you too far. There's a positive aesthetic to my persona. It's an image that can be misleading because it suggests a professorial, soft attitude, a reluctance to bring down the hammer. But inside, I have a hard edge, a willingness to mete out punishment and take action that may hurt individuals. It doesn't reveal itself often, but it's there. And those within your organization learn to respect it. You will benefit if that same understanding exists within your team. In Bill's second year, he had to tell Ron Singleton, a very good left tackle, to take a hike. Ron wanted a large salary increase that the 49ers didn't have. At the time, Bill was working as both the head coach and general manager for $160,000 a year. Ron walked through the locker room one day and said disparaging remarks toward Bill and the 49ers. Bill had his staff pack everything up from Ron's locker into a box and deliver it to his house. He was gone. This was a reminder to all 49ers that if you are to go against the organization, you're gone, no matter who you are. Bill says, personally, when I sensed from time to time that our team or staff was getting comfortable, I wasn't afraid to exercise whatever acting skills I could summon. During a practice that was lacking high energy and laser-like focus, I might suddenly just let my emotions boil over, throw down my clipboard, chew out an assistant coach, they knew what I was up to, and exhibit the emotions and language I'd seen Pete Newell, former head coach of Cal basketball, display so effectively. So what I personally take from this is that a hard edge lets you act the part. There's not a fear of going there when needed, and you don't have to be emotionally and mentally invested in it. It's more of a tool for us to use as coaches. Bill Walsh coached some of the greatest football players of all time. One of these players is Joe Montana, who's either the greatest or one of the greatest quarterbacks in NFL history. Tom Brady might have something to say about that now. But Joe doesn't stand out as an extroverted leader. He has other qualities that help those around him look to him as one. And so where Bill might be kind of this type A personality, Joe wasn't. Bill says that Joe didn't stand out as what sociologists call the alpha male, like his great teammate in later years, Steve Young. If you watch Joe Montana interact with a group of athletes, he wasn't the one you'd pick out as the man around whom everything focused and congregated. He didn't appear to need attention or acclaim and was good at sharing credit. Others sought and fed off attention, but not Joe. This is a little unusual among superstars in sports or business. Beyond his rare talent, there was something else working for Joe that had a profound effect on others and created a willingness to accept him as the on-field leader. Despite the fact that he was the starting quarterback, with all the trappings that come with that position, he never played favorites or believed that a person's reputation, status, or credentials entitled him to special treatment. When you worked with Joe, you were treated as an equal. His leadership skills were demonstrated more by behavior on the field or in the locker room than by what he might say just before or during the game. Joe's interaction with other players and coaches was democratic, sincere, and understated. He led with his own talent, quiet confidence, and unassuming demeanor. He could become almost trance-like at times of heightened pressure. This accounted for the amazing 31 fourth-quarter comebacks he engineered during his NFL career. Equally impressive is the fact that in 4 Super Bowl games, he never threw a single interception. I didn't realize that before reading this book, and I'm just coming on it again. Those stats are outrageous. Ronnie Lott was another great leader that Bill coached. Bill says about Ronnie, his will to improve created a very real sense that if you wanted to associate with him professionally to be on a Ronnie Lott team, you were expected to sacrifice to the same extreme degree he did. When a grueling set of push-ups was concluded by the coaching staff, Ronnie would often call for more. He would be the one setting the standard higher and higher. This was true during the season he joined us in San Francisco won a Super Bowl. It was equally true the following season when our one-loss record tanked, 3-6. He never quit. In his own personal example, he became a de facto coach, one whose specialty was teaching others what it meant to give it everything you've got. And now see if you can guess this next player. Bill says about this next player, the night before a 49ers game in Houston during my 6th season as head coach, I was watching a local television station's sports highlights in my hotel room. One of the games it covered involved a tiny college in Itta, Mississippi, called Mississippi Valley State. The school's top receiver was a kid who seemed to find a way to get open, catch the ball, and gain yardage with ease. I think he scored 4 or 5 touchdowns in the game, in spite of the fact that he would not have won a medal in the Olympic 100-yard dash. Once he hit full stride, however, Rice, which maybe you've already guessed, Jerry Rice, was something truly remarkable. He had functional speed, fantastic moves, and hands that were as sure as a surgeon's. Plus, Jerry Rice had the heart of a warrior, and I knew I could design plays that got him open and put the ball in his hands. He was not considered a top-flight prospect by scouts around the league because he had a mediocre 40 time, not much better than 4.6 seconds. They considered him a 5th or 6th round pick. I was strongly advised not to waste our first pick on him. I knew better, ignored the advice I had been given, and focused on his outstanding speed and moves from 15 to 50 yards. A trade with New England moved us up enough to acquire Jerry Rice with our number 1 pick. Here's my point. Conventional wisdom often produces conventional results. Conventional thinking didn't produce Jerry Rice. There's a great story about Bill's obsession with football and teaching. He says, "Once during a get together with friends, I was sitting on a couch in front of the fireplace with my arm around my wife, Jerry. Unconsciously, I began diagramming a passing play on her shoulder with my index finger while carrying on a conversation with someone across the room. After a while, Jerry looked at me and said, 'Honey, did it score a touchdown?' I didn't know what she was talking about until she told me. I didn't know I had been drawing a play on her arm with my finger. That's how much I love it. That's how much you need to love teaching your team. It is not a duty or burden that you get out of the way so you can move on to important things. It is the important thing. For me, it was a fundamental source of personal joy. I was consumed by the process of developing the abilities of others. You do it because you really care for it. You do it because you have to. And when you're that much into the subject you're teaching, you'll find ways to become an expert in it. Bill says expertise is the inventory of knowledge and experience you possess on a particular subject. You're not necessarily born with it. You develop it, research it, thrive on learning as much about your subject as you possibly can. The greater your expertise, the greater your potential to teach, the stronger and more productive you can be as a leader. Here's a good rule of thumb. The more you know, the higher you go. To advance in any profession, I believe it is imperative to understand all aspects of that profession, not just one particular area. This is where we can see Cruyff's intelligence also, and Cruyff's passion and expertise for the game. If you remember, whenever they would get off the field, whenever he was playing under Michels, the thing that gave him as much satisfaction or maybe secondary satisfaction to playing was discussing the tactics of the game. He was so obsessed with football. And Phil Jackson was also really obsessed with basketball. Maybe secondary, well, definitely not secondary too, but he was also as obsessed with psychology and the way to get into players' heads. Bill Walsh is that same type of person. Bill says that the most gratifying time of his life as a teacher was probably not with the 49ers. It was much earlier, when I was with the Cincinnati Bengals, when I was personally responsible for teaching a wide assortment of skills and ideas to a diverse group of individuals and creating and implementing the passing game. And I did this all without the great responsibilities that come with being a head coach, with the distractions that took me away from teaching. This leads into the last part of our discussion here about Bill, and it's the negative side of what Bill was doing. Perhaps when people talk about burnout, one of the pictures they should hold up is Bill Walsh. And even though he was committed and enthusiastic, there are periods in his career, year 2, 4, 6, and his last at year 8, even when they win these Super Bowls, where he would tell people he was going to quit, even phoning the owner and trying to replace himself with one of his qualified assistants. His son, Craig Walsh, also says he was a perfectionist, and he saw perfection as being most likely achieved only if his ideas and decisions weren't filtered through and inevitably, in his opinion, misconstrued and misapplied by others. He had to be the one in charge. This leads Bill to having a delegation problem. Bill says, "There were others on my staff who were able and willing to take on more responsibilities. They were willing. I was reluctant, even unwilling. Unable is perhaps more accurate. Of the various failures I cite myself for, one of the most problematic may have been my inability to delegate to the extent I could and should have." Craig Walsh, his son, again, concludes that extreme success as a leader in the NFL and extreme distress as a person makes Dad's story so compelling, his lessons in leadership so valuable. His staggering drive to prevail, his ferocious competitive instinct, and his singular brilliance as a strategist, organizer, and team builder produced historic results. The lessons he shares in The Score That Takes Care of Itself are both a beacon for leadership and a cautionary tale, what to do and what not to do. In Bill's last season with the 49ers, he wins his 3rd Super Bowl in 8 years. When reporters infiltrate the locker room to ask him if he has energy for another year, he doesn't answer, instead breaking down and whispering to his son to take him out of there. He left it all on the field, Bill Walsh did, in the locker room and in the boardroom for the 49ers. He is a legendary coach and leader who continues to influence the NFL through his lineage of coaches. And if you actually look up his lineage of coaches, it's insane. In the 8 years, he had 14 assistant coaches go to be head coaches in the NFL. And look at the coaches that they produced as well. It's incredible. This ends our discussion on Bill Walsh. There are many, many lessons in this book, definitely more than the other two books that we've read before. And the reason why I say that is because this book is aimed towards leaders and managers, not just coaches. It's a self-development book in a lot of ways, and there's a lot to take from it. The stories jump around, as I've told you in the beginning, but I highly recommend this not only to coaches, to those that are managing teams or those entrepreneurs that may own a business. This has been Bill Walsh, and the score takes care of itself. Thank you all for listening.